This may be the most important Supreme Court case of the entire year. And unfortunately, you're probably gonna hear me say that a number of times this year and across the next few years. But specifically, the case in question here centers around Trump's effort to end birthright citizenship. They even added a whole special session to their calendar just to hear this high-stakes case. You know, this case, it's very unique and unusual for a number of reasons, so to kind of understand what's going on here, we have to go back a little. Because as we've talked about on the show numerous times, one of the first actions that Donald Trump took after assuming office was to issue an executive order that ended automatic citizenship for people born in the US to undocumented immigrants or foreign visitors. With Trump arguing that the Constitution does not actually guarantee birthright citizenship, which to put it lightly is a radical fringe interpretation that the vast majority of legal experts disagree with. For more than a century, Supreme Court precedent has established that the Constitution guarantees birthright citizenship to anyone born on US soil, with very limited exceptions like the children of diplomats. Congress even passed a law codifying it back in 1940, which is also why it wasn't surprising that the executive order was challenged immediately by immigrant groups alongside 22 states and DC. And since then, 3 separate federal judges have issued nationwide injunctions arguing that the policy is unconstitutional and temporarily blocking it from taking effect while litigation plays out. With then those decisions being upheld by 3 separate appeals courts which refused to unblock Trump's order as the case progressed through the legal system. With then the Trump administration appealing those injunctions to the Supreme Court on an emergency basis, and that's where things start to get a little sticky. Because the lawyers for the Trump administration are technically not asking the High Court to determine if Trump's effort to end birthright citizenship is constitutional, at least not yet. Instead, they're arguing that the federal judges who blocked the policy from taking effect lacked the power to issue nationwide injunctions, also known as universal injunctions. And specifically, the administration has claimed that federal judges don't have the power to issue broad rulings that affect people other than those immediately involved in the case that they're hearing. So when a federal judge issues an injunction based on their belief that the policy that they're blocking is unconstitutional or causes immediate harm, that decision should only apply to the plaintiffs who sued over the policy. And in this case, the Trump administration is asking the Supreme Court to limit the scope of the lower court's orders on birthright citizenship so that they only apply to the groups and states that filed the suits, not the whole country. But there, you have the plaintiffs arguing that a ruling like that would cause total chaos until their cases can be resolved, which likely will require a separate trip to the Supreme Court to debate the actual merits of the cases. Right, so the situation is if the Supreme Court were to agree with the Trump administration and say, okay, these injunctions only apply to the groups and states that sued, it would mean that Trump's birthright citizenship order would go into effect for about half of the country. But then for the remaining half of the states that sued, they wouldn't have to implement it. So you'd be looking at a situation where children born to undocumented immigrants could be considered citizens in a state like New Jersey, which is among the plaintiffs, but not in Pennsylvania, which isn't. And so the states that are suing say this could create a huge fucking mess, with New Jersey's Attorney General explaining, we have parents in South Jersey whose kids are born in Philadelphia. Pennsylvania is not in the suit. Are those kids really not American because their parents went to the hospital that's closest to their house, which happens to be in Pennsylvania? That makes no sense. It's frankly absurd. You then also had the Solicitor General for Washington State claiming that families could just simply relocate in order to be under a totally different set of immigration laws, arguing, under their theory, a child born in Philadelphia would not become a citizen, but of course that child could easily move across the border to New Jersey or another state, and that would just be a logistical nightmare. And then beyond that, the lawyers also say that a ruling in favor of the administration would cost the plaintiff states millions of dollars in health and other benefits available to American children. And that's in addition to forcing them to do a massive complex overhaul of identification systems because birth certificates would no longer be considered proof of citizenship. And so as a result, they argue that injunctions that apply nationwide are necessary for situations like this, where there are so many complexities and fundamental rights that are in question. But again, it's not just birthright citizenship at stake. Depending on the scope of the justice's ruling, their decision here could apply to all universal injunctions. A move that could, 1, significantly limit the power of federal judges to limit presidential policies, and 2, roll back injunctions that have halted or significantly limited numerous policies that Trump has enacted since taking office. Or with that, including other immigration-related orders, cuts to the federal workforce, efforts to ban DEI, and many other actions that would now be allowed to take effect, at least partially and temporarily, while litigation plays out. Now with that, as far as how the Supreme Court might rule here, right now it's pretty unclear. During oral arguments today, the court appeared very divided on the issue, with, for example, the New York Times explaining that several justices seem torn on whether single federal judges should have the power to freeze executive actions, but then, at the same time, saying they also seem troubled by the legality and consequences of the executive order underlying the case. And then beyond that, some of the more conservative members also reportedly appeared to indicate that they would limit the ability of federal judges to issue nationwide injunctions. Though some of those justices also question the practical implications of doing so and how it would impact the ability of the legal system to counter unconstitutional policies. While you have the court's liberals making it clear that they believe that Trump's birthright citizenship order is blatantly unconstitutional, that does not necessarily mean that they would vote in favor of allowing federal judges to grant universal injunctions. And so with all that, you had some, including the Times, saying that the justices appeared to signal that they might try to find some kind of middle ground, saying perhaps by issuing guidance that would allow such temporary blocks only for some kinds of cases, or by requesting more briefing on the merits of the underlying executive order. And that option also seems especially likely given the fact that justices across the political spectrum, including the liberals, have criticized this practice in the past. Because at least part of this, it's not a new debate. Legal experts, members of Congress, and presidents in both parties have long condemned the practice of universal injunctions, especially as they become increasingly more common in recent years. Because, a big thing is that before the 1960s, nationwide injunctions were almost never used. But now, in recent years, they've risen substantially as Congress has now become more and more deadlocked, forcing presidents to have to rely more on executive orders to enact new policies. And that has been especially true with Donald Trump, who's been very fond of unilateral action, even though he has Congress on his side. And in fact, regarding this issue, according to the Harvard Law Review, just in his first term alone, federal judges issued 64 injunctions against his policies. And to compare, Bush had 6, Obama had 12, and Biden had 14. And now, just a few months into Trump Part 2 electric Trumpaloo, the federal judges have already filed almost 40 injunctions against Trump's policies. That's nearly 3 times more than any of his predecessors had for their entire terms. So of course, a big part of that is connected to how much he's trying to do by executive order compared to his predecessors, as well as how many of those orders seemingly fly in the face of the Constitution. But still, you have plenty of people across the political spectrum who think that universal injunctions exceed the constitutional powers of federal judges. But then also, on the other side, you have proponents arguing that nationwide injunctions are imperative to counter bad policies and executive overreach, noting that presidents, and in particular Trump, they've been testing the bounds of their power with policies that go against legal precedent. And then beyond that, other legal experts contend that universal injunctions are necessary to ensure that policies that impact the entire nation are enforced consistently nationwide, which is something that's especially important when it comes to matters that affect constitutional rights. But as far as what's actually going to happen here, we're not going to know just yet, because the court's decision, it's not expected until late June or early July. So yeah, I guess just consider this constitutional edging. That is, I guess, how I'm going to end that story. I'm sorry, and/or you're welcome. Hey, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this clip from the full Philip DeFranco show. And also, a big thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring our Clips channel. Turn your passion into profit over at squarespace.com/Phil, or use the QR code. Because whether you're launching a business or a lucrative side hustle, your website is your digital business card. It's the only space where you control the story, no algorithms or distractions. And with Squarespace, it's so easy because they got a ton of stunning professional templates with drag and drop editing that makes site design incredibly simple, no coding required. So get started for free at squarespace.com/Phil, or scan the QR code on screen and use code Phil for 10% off when ready to launch. Squarespace.com/Phil.